What's going on, everyone? It's Mitch from RespectMyReason.com back with another episode of the RMR Podcast. We're looking at West Coast cannabis today. We got Dave Holmes of Clade9. How you doing today, Dave?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
100, man. Appreciate you hopping on here, man. Excited to get into this episode and have this conversation. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, every guest, the question number one I start off with is the origin story with the plant being cannabis. So whether that's personal, professional, a little bit of both. Just curious kind of when you, Dave, and weed started your journey together.
Ooh, this is a fun one. I was 9 years old, and my brother was selling weed, and we went to visit my uncle's house, and my uncle was growing weed in the backyard. So my brother was like, "Hey, you got to go down there with me and pick some buds off, because we're gonna go sell these, buds to your friends in 5th grade or whatever." So that was my first experience. It was literally going down and cutting buds off as a 9-year-old kid, taking them up to my brother's, house, and then drying them out in an old record player lid. And then, he literally packaged that shit up to me, gave it to me to sell to my 5th grade friends, and that was it. And of course, I got busted for selling weed, and he got arrested, taken down to the LAPD station. And I remember vividly being in the car with my mom. And at the time, and I've been looking for these things forever, they had these Dare rulers that had all the drugs listed. And, we were waiting to pick up my brother from the station. I had one of those rulers. I'm like, "Mom, what are barbiturates? What are opiates? Like all these drugs." And just, yeah, that was my first experience. It was like kind of like, fun that turned into, a tough moment with my brother getting arrested. But he got out. He was like, in junior high school. So they gave him a slap on the wrist. But that was it. And, I was like smoking really young, like 9, 10 years old. And then I took a break for a long time because I got in trouble, just wanted to clean up. And so I was literally clean for many years after that, and reintroduced in college to a cultivator who showed me indoor cultivation.
What time was that?
That was around 1999. I came back. This is like many years after those first experiences, like picking, buds off my uncle's plant in the backyard. Like 1999, a friend of mine in college was like, we're studying, for like a test, and he had like a big ass bag of weed in his pocket, and as we're studying, and I'm like, "Damn, what do you have on you?" He's like, "Yo, check this out. This is like this Hawaiian. I just grew this shit in my hydroponic garden." And I'm just like, "What? What is hydroponics?" And he was just like, "You gotta come check it out." And we drove over to his crib, and he busted out this laboratory that he had built in his college apartment. And I was like, "Damn, I gotta do this. How do you do this?" And then he showed me, he's like, "Yeah, you got to go up to San Francisco to the, the Buyers Club, and you get clones." And he had I remember he had Hawaiian, he had Pure Haze, he had like some White Widow or something else. And then that was it. That was the bug that got me going in cultivation.
Getting to see how many lights did he have?
Oh, we were talking 2 lights, 2 to 4 lights. He was like 2 to 4 lights. But I mean, when you see that, when you're like, 21-year-old kid, you're just like, "Whoa, you're gonna go to jail for a long time, man. It's just dangerous," And it was dangerous at those times, but it was literally 2 lights and like maybe a little veg space. But he just, that it was so technical. And at the time, I was getting my degree in math, right? So I was really thinking technically and focused on like science and physics, computer science. That was the shit I really liked. So to see this like really technical contraption growing up, I didn't even know you could grow plants indoors. I was like, "What? This is crazy." And so I think that kind of got me into it too, is like the science behind it. I was really interested in, I was just interested in learning at that point. So just to see something new, it really inspired curiosity.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. That's did you recognize the scent too? As you
Oh
said, as
yeah,
soon as you smelled the
yeah,
bag, you're like, oh, I know exactly what this is.
I mean, my family has been around cannabis since, multiple generations. My brother was actually growing. The brother that had me sell the weed and got in trouble, he was growing. And so when I told him, like, hey, I saw this hydroponic grow, he's like, yeah, I've been growing for 5 years hydroponically. I'm like, what? And then he kind of like started showing me the ropes, really. So that friend that introduced me randomly in college, I just kind of got a pointers from him, but then I quickly told my brother what I saw, and he was like, come on, let me show you what's up. So then my brother showed me his 16 light room that he had already built. And then that's kind of where I really started to learn from my brother. And he had already been breeding at the time. So he's like, here is I think it was like I forgot back in the day how you did it, but it was a catalog for Heaven Stairway seeds. And so then he showed me how to order, and I ordered, I think, bubble gum from Serious Seeds. I ordered maybe some AK-47 and some Dutch Passion White Widow. And he gave me some seeds that he did, which was a blueberry cross with the strain called Niagara. And that was like my first set of seeds. And I built a little chamber in my girlfriend's garage with a 1000 HPS light and a wall AC unit. And that was fucking my first one lighter.
At what point did you break into commercial growing?
Commercial growing, 2006, probably 2007 is where I was like, okay, I have customers, from my little 4 lighter in the house, and I think I'm ready to go to the warehouse. So I started to research, like collectives, and in the time in California, like the mid 2000s, things were starting to ramp up a lot, and there was kind of like this effort to get people legal through these collectives that would protect your cultivations. And that's about the time that I started to look at the commercial grows, because I realized, hey, I could get protected for cultivating for these patients, And that was about 2006. 2006, I rented a little warehouse and we started going commercial. But it was nothing like today. We're talking like 12 lighters, like 18 lighters. Up until a little bit later, then we start going bigger, maybe like 2010.
And what point did you come up with the brand name Clade9?
Well, in 2015 or 14, I think we came up with Clade9 itself. Originally, we were called Canagen, and we thought it was a dope name because we love breeding. A lot of the varieties that we grow today, we bred ourselves. So we were like, Canagen, Cannabis Genetics. That's a dope name. And we thought of that in 2009. I even trademarked it. But then 2010 rolls around, 2011 rolls around, and you start to see like Canna this, Canna that. There was so many Cannas coming on the scene. It was like, dude, we're kind of just getting smothered. If you look at a list of who's at the event, there's like 50 Cannas. So we realized we needed to change our name at that point. So eventually the Clade9 came up, and we were like, that's what we got to go for. And the reason I chose Clade9 because I thought Clade was always a really cool word and nobody knew what it was. It's kind of obscure, And I learned that in grad school when I was getting my master's in math. I was like, oh shit, that's a dope word, Clade. So Clade9 was like kind of put the 9 from the Delta 9 with the Clade.
Yeah. Oh, I like that, man. I like that. And I also like that you pivoted away from the Canna because, all due respect to the greens and the Cannas, but there is, like you said, you start going to these conferences and look at the business list, that C column, that G column.
It kept getting bigger and bigger. It's just like, you're gonna get lost in the shuffle, So I always liked that word Clade. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, it's a really cool concept, And it comes from evolutionary theory. It's like kind of like in a more advanced way to say a branch on the tree of life. So it has like that genetic association, which I know is important for us as a brand because we do breed our own strains.
And that was something that I wanted to get into is like, I know a lot of your guys' genetics are proprietary genetics. So at what point some of these, like, I know, what I'm familiar with, what you guys did, the Fig Bar, Diamond Dust, when did these strains first kind of come about, and what were you kind of searching for when you first started the journey to breed these?
I think as a breeder, you're always just trying to look for perfection, whatever that means in whatever line you're working on. I started breeding pretty early because my brother always taught me, when you get your seeds, like your first seeds, your first thing you should do is make more seeds so you have enough for the next run. So it was really early before the day of clones. There were clones floating around in the 90s, but almost everybody was growing from seed. So I think because everyone was growing from seed, you kind of got used to making seeds, and that made it easy to think about breeding and making crosses. So that was part of it, I think, is kind of being comfortable with crossbreeding, but also just the drive to create new stuff and be creative, and always wanting to improve, on the cultivars that we had in our collection. And I mean, the stuff we have now is just like so much more fire compared to what we had back in the day, at least visually. I know there was a lot of strains that were like really good that I wish we had, because we've gone a little too far in the hybridization. But in terms of just like visual appeal and structure, I mean, the flower that we have nowadays looks insane compared to what we had 15 years ago.
And what do you like on that? So I've heard a lot of people talk about that. Obviously the colors have gone crazy, purple. I remember when purple, like even when I was selling weed, like even if the weed was stressed, someone would be like, yo, it's not purple, it's stressed. I'm like, I don't even care. I can get more for this based on the color alone. I don't, like, obviously I want real purple, but I can still make money on it, So, but some people claim that the flavors back then were more, I don't know whether it's more true or whatever. What's your take on that? I don't know. I feel like there's so many more flavors now.
Yeah.
I've seen so many expressions of them. It's hard for me to buy into. I know maybe like true sour D's and things like that aren't around as much anymore. And, we miss those, but I think the flavor game's gone crazy.
Flavor game's definitely gone crazy. Yeah. I mean, I think my theory is that back in the day, because there was less choices, it was easier to remember the flavors, It's like if you have your choices are Sprite and soda, like Sprite, Coke, and orange soda, you're going to remember those flavors. But if your choices are now Sprite, Coke, orange soda, Sierra Mist, Cosmic, blah, like Cosmic Raspberry, banana, like the flavor profiles, there's so many of them. It's kind of hard for your brain to put a distinct memory on those, so many flavors. But when you have a few choices, you kind of really remember them. I think that's part of it. So, those flavors that we used to have back in the day, we just remember because we didn't have a lot of choices. It's like OG, we got Bubba, we got the Haze, we got Perps, we got Tangies. And I think that's one of the reasons that we kind of went the route of classifying our strains by those flavor profiles, because they are really distinct, compared to like the mixes today. I do use the soda analogy a lot, but I think it's a good one. It's like you have, remember when you were a kid and you went to like AM/PM and you had the sodas, and it was like, you have orange soda, you have Sprite, you have cola, you have like Dr. Pepper. And those are all really distinct, because they're so different from one another. And so you could taste one and know what they are. It's kind of like those old school strains that we all really understood. Like, this is what the smoke is. This is what the effect is. This is why I like it. This is why I don't like it. But it's when you take them and blend them all together and you try to taste that, it's so complicated. You can't even put like, it's hard to even describe it. Like if you blend 10 sodas and drink it, it's like, that's never, it's not bad, but it's hard to put a finger on what it is. And I think that makes it tough for that to become something that's like widely accepted.
100%, man. 100%. And again, we're talking about that right before we went on here. Like, that's something I said I like about you guys classifying strains by families, because that's absolutely like how we look at things. And like for me, as a consumer, like removing myself from the industry, but just as a consumer, when I go into a store and they're like, what do you like? I almost want the bud tender to approach it from that family perspective, right? Like, I don't like the Jack and the Hazes and like that terpene profiles. Not personally, not for me. I know a lot of people love it.
I don't like it either, but I know why you don't like it.
But it's like when I walk into a store, if you can know I don't want anything with that flavor profile prominent
Yeah.
in it. That erases, your menu gets narrow, right? And then you learn what I like. And it's like, I don't just like, Gelato 33, right? Like I like gelatos because I like sherbs. So anything that's a sherb or a sherb cross, right? Or like I like OGs. And for me, like good bud tender experiences come from people that kind of understand that, whether they're able to categorize it in the families or not, but understand like the genetic lineage and what the forward facing flavor profiles of these genetics are. So that's what I like how you guys classify that, because even if I'm pretty hip to the strains, but even if I wasn't hip to the strains, but I know the families, I can easily identify, I think I'd be interested in that. And I don't want that in my session.
No, yeah, that's exactly, you're following the whole point of it perfectly, which is why I think we developed it. And really it was, I got the idea when I started to look at some of the research that guys like Jeff Raber were doing in terpene profiles. Because he did this big study where he took all these terpene profiles from all the growers sending into his lab, and he put them into a program to try to classify them using terpene profiles. There's something in statistics called principal component analysis. And what it does is it takes all, let's say 38 different terpenes and compares them by like what terpenes make the biggest difference in the actual smell, right? And what he saw was it was just like these clusters of strains that were named totally different, but their terpene profiles kind of matched. And so that's where I was like, oh, okay, well, that's the future right there. Like that's pure science. You're taking terpenes, you're comparing the terpene levels, and you're saying the ones that have terpenes that are similar strains. And indica hybrid sativas, they've been so hybridized that terpenes really are probably one of the best ways to describe how they're different now. And that's why we're like, okay, when we start to classify strains, indica hybrid sativa is just not going to make sense, because we're a brand based on science and just being really honest. And so that's the honest way to explain to a consumer like what they're trying to find. And that's what from experience, right? It's like that Gelato 33 or that Sherb or that, what glitter ball or whatever the newest incarnation is, it's still like a gelato cross. It has like caryophyllene dominant, and it has myrcene and limonene in a certain amount that make it similar to Gelato 33. So that's in that class, that's like a gelato or a dessert strain, however you want to define it. Those are similar because the terpenes they have are similar, and it affects you the same way,
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And so we were talking about earlier of having the less selection. I remember back in the day very vividly, I was getting packs of Jack for a while that I remember were so green and so flavorful. And I remember like loving it back in the day. Maybe not loving it, probably wasn't my favorite, but it was good. And someone similar to your point earlier brought up to me, they're like, maybe it wasn't that you liked it so much, it was just such a strong terpene dominant flower that your mind just was like, wow, that's really good. And the moment I was able to taste all these different things, I was like, you know what? That's like towards the bottom of what I actually like, So have you had that experience as a smoker of like liking a strain, but as you progress, you're kind of like, you know what? That's really tasty, but it's not for me.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I think the first thing I ever smoked was that from my uncle was like, it was called Fuzzy Hawaiian. And it was, I don't remember it because it's been so long, but it had orange hairs. I do remember that. And it was really fun. It was like like fucking laugh. You laugh till you almost like cry because it's hilarious as a kid. But that's a really good effect. You kind of want to mimic that really fun effect. But you discover stuff you don't like for sure. Like I can never, for whatever reason, Tangy doesn't sit well with me. The J1 is better to me than a Tangy, but still I just don't like it as much. For me, like in my menu, the Fig Bar is my favorite strain, and then probably the Diamond Dust too, which are more balanced. But I think everyone kind of finds what they like, and you evolve, for sure, to find that one cultivar, that family of cultivars that you like. Some people are crazy because they like everything. Like I love J1, I love the Fig Bar, I love this. I'm like, hey man, you have a much more broad palette than I do,
And that's something that I like, and that's funny even learning that about you, like that you're not the biggest fan of like the hazes and stuff, but obviously your menu includes that, because I think at the end of the day, another thing I was giving you flowers on before we started is having that menu that's not just so narrow and singular that we see some people do. There's nothing wrong with like, hey, this flavor we like,
Right.
it's selling well, let's just double, triple down on that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but you know, I think there is something to be said about taking that approach of filling out a menu that kind of covers multiple flavor bases and customers. Because just as much as I'm not a big Jack fan, I'll never be on, sit on a pedestal and be like, oh, that's a trash strain.
Right.
Beyond the legacy that Jack Herrera did for cannabis, the individual, people on my team love it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes I'll open a jar and I'll immediately be like, man, I don't want this anywhere. And like people are like, I dibs, right? Like that's mine. That's, so I know, like you said in the session, people have different palates. So when it comes to you guys approaching, the curation of your menu, what's the importance of making sure you're not going too narrow and then also providing kind of all those different flavor profiles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I've learned a lot about kind of the menu curation, especially having to be in California where it's so competitive versus like other states like Nevada or Arizona, especially early on in those states where you're operating, you can pretty much put out anything. They're going to buy it. It's going to sell out. But yeah, what I realized is, at least for our brand, we wanted to have one of each of the best of those flavors on our menu. So we wanted to cover everything, right? We wanted to cover a haze. We want to cover a tangy, right? Like with our orange push pop. And we wanted to have an OG Kush, right? We want something like in the Bubba family. We want a perp. And then once we kind of found the best in class cultivar for each of the flavors, then we kind of see, okay, well, which one moves the best? Because, I have a business to run and I want to make sure I survive and pay my bills. And you can't go too narrow, right? So that's why my thought was we have a nice curated menu that fits kind of everyone's flavor profile. And then we just figure out how to grow enough of each, right? So it's like, yeah, Fig Bar is our most popular variety. It's our best seller, followed probably by Private Reserve and then J1. But there's, 20% of the population that just loves Diamond Dust. So we grow that for them. And you curate the menu and then you got to kind of figure out how much volume do you do of each flavor. So that you're kind of always like keeping everything really fresh. You don't want anything sitting on the shelf. You want to harvest it, you want to trim it, test it, package it, and get it immediately out to the shelf. And that's, that'll help your customer base be really loyal, because nothing better than a fresh flower, that hasn't been sitting for 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
But I think that was it. It's always just like looking at all the different flavor profiles, trying to find the best of each. And we're always looking for new flavors that fit, if we find like a better tangy orange cross than the orange push pop, it would be replaced. And that's been the process for the last 10 years.
And on that, you noted, right, how competitive the California space is specifically. It's a unique spot because population and capital wise, thus far in legalization, it's got the most people. We've seen a lot of money invested in the industry out there, which makes it, which is good for the industry in some regards, but it makes it difficult to operate in, right? When you got people competing on the same level with different bank accounts behind them, right?
Yeah, I'm at the lower end of the bank account list too. So you guys, anyone out there has a bigger account, call me please. But no, it does make it tough, and it's tough too because California, because there's so much product being produced, it's easier for like a sales and marketing organization to come in and just kind of like source product from a grower, and kind of put it out. And nothing wrong with that. That's like, how business evolves, but it makes it's a tricky kind of catch-22 because you're kind of selling bulk to survive at a lower price point, to like a brand only brand that has they don't have as many expenses, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of like crazy balance, each supporting each other to survive, but almost like no one will be profitable until there's just less volume. Really, at the end of the day, unless we could produce cheaper, which is hard to do because we've already invested our infrastructure. Like we're in the city, our power isn't going down. I think at the end of the day, it's the taxes are what's killing us all. Just 30% excise. You're paying 35% more out the door versus like a trap shop. How do we ever compete?
Yeah, until politicians, not just in California, but especially California, understand that this tax rate is the
Oh
main
yeah.
thing, not only fucking up the industry, but ultimately causing less taxable dollars to enter the system, right? You lower these tax dollars, the transactions on the system are going to go through the
Oh,
fucking
going to go
roof.
through the
It's going to
roof,
be more volume.
and then on top of the taxes, you have like, we have to pay higher percentage for loans. We can't get, we can't
Yep.
get bank loans, and we can't write off our expenses. Our taxes on our write-offs are almost, nothing. So from every angle, it makes it a really tough business, on the regulated side.
And then, and back to that menu curation, right? Like the California consumer, like I live in Washington, and Colorado are the most mature when it comes to adult use or recreation, whatever keyword you want to assign it. I've always said the California consumer is the most mature consumer in the country, whether they're as hip to certain things that the echo chamber of education wishes they were at, cannabis industry education wishes they're at, in terms of just knowing quality, knowing flavors, and knowing the price point and having the access to it. It's the most mature marketplace in the country, which makes it difficult at times to please something, because cannabis is something that people of all walks of life, all income levels, all demographics consume, right? It's impossible to please everyone.
Yeah.
What has kind of gone into figuring out like who those ideal customers are? And again, back to that menu curation of making sure that you're not doing too much, but you're also appeasing these customers, because they can be difficult in the California market.
They are. Cali customers are difficult. God bless them, But that comes back to the breeding and like, how do you curate the menu? And when I was talking about, you kind of have a range of flavors, and you create, that's like you're in your theoretical mind. You're like, okay, we have a blueberry to cover this, or like a tangy to cover this, an OG to cover this, and we think we have a good menu. After that, it's really just testing in the market, whether it's like through we would throw our taste master parties, where we invite a bunch of people that smoke weed, and we have them try all of our flower in different flavors, and we take data on kind of what their experiences are, what they like, and that's part of it. Looking at sales data. I think there's a lot of data, on top of like the knowledge of what you think the menu should be. It's combining that with actual consumer data, and like your own experiences. Everyone that I know, I try to give them flower, especially if it's a new flower, to test the variety, so we could get as much feedback as possible before we release something. And sometimes we might think, okay, this is going to be a banger, we release it, for whatever reason it doesn't hit, but most of the time, I mean, over the 15 years or whatever I've been doing on the breeding side and just testing flavors with people, I think I have a pretty good idea of what is going to be popular, and it's also like, it's like the stock market in cannabis, like in 2000, I don't know, 10, everyone went all in on Blue Dream, right? And then it just like, it's overgrown. So you got to kind of look at that too. Like, what is everybody growing? So I think the fact that, we have that diverse menu insulates us from the risk of going all in as well, because it happens every few years. It's whether it's all OG, it's all gelato crosses, it's all Blue Dream, it's all people they see something selling and they all go in and they overproduce it, and then something else comes back. Having said that, OG's still been a top seller for 20 years now. And I think the gelatos will stick around as well as like its own class of flavors that people will like a lot. That's why the haze has always been around, like the Jacks, right? The Tangies, I don't think sell as much, but there's always a group of people that just that's their favorite flavor for whatever reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the OGs. That's one of the main things. I'm lucky I get to go to LA so much, or California so much, but I'm jealous having to live in Washington. Man, we don't have near as much OGs. I know we got Ghost out here in the Kush family, but there's not a ton of OGs in this market. California is definitely the birthplace, and they're everywhere, and I love that strain.
Yeah, me too. OG's always been a classic, especially growing up in LA, and like the 818 specifically. It's just like OG capital of the world, like everybody was growing OG, at least when I was younger and starting to cultivate indoors. And it was always that strain you had to grow. So I knew when we dropped our menu, I was like, we have to have a fire ass OG. We have to. It just because we're an LA brand. If you're an LA brand, you got to have an OG. You have to.
Yeah.
So, and it's been great for us.
What is it when you set out to breed, start putting together a new strain? How long does that kind of take from your ideation or your thought process to actually having something production ready? So for the customers out there to
Yeah.
understand how long the process takes.
It takes years, and I don't think it ever stops. It's kind of like this obsession with perfection. It's almost like if you're a chef, right? It's like you don't stop once you found this pizza. Like, oh, this pepperoni pizza is the best. I'm quitting. It's like I'm going to make it better. What else can we do to make it better, more unique? But I think it comes back to kind of that menu profile again, and like trying to find best in class stuff. So as a breeder, I think you're always working on multiple projects. Like finding a better OG or finding a better, gelato cross or finding a better Jack cross. But then there's other things too. You're like, oh, rare cannabinoids. Like, hey, let's try to develop a THCV strain that has an OG Kush terpene profile. Like that sounds pretty cool. Let's try it. So that's the beauty of breeding is you can kind of get really creative, not only with flavors, but with also like rare cannabinoids, and then there's on the cultivation side, because we're talking mainly consumer side, like how it smokes, how it affects you, how it looks. On the cultivation side, that's part of the breeding as well. Like the yield, right? The structure, is it resistant to powdery mildew or like pathogens? Like those are things to really consider, because you might have a super fire flower, but it yields 35 grams a square foot. I mean, you're not gonna be able to grow it. Nobody's gonna grow that. And that's one of the things, hopefully one day there'll be a connoisseur market that will allow us to really focus on stuff that's super, super rare and unique, and that we can't grow like nowadays, like stuff that's like a 16-month or 16-week flowering period. You can't grow that stuff indoors, like a Neville's Haze. But if you could, and you had a market for it that would pay for it, that would be incredible, because you would have a lot more unique flavors out there.
And that's one of the questions I was going to ask, because I ask every cultivator this. I'm not a grower myself. I'll always be transparent about that. But in being a nerd and a lover of the plant in this industry, I've learned that, right? Like that in this commercial market, I mean, it's always mattered, but especially in this day and age, right? The yield matters and THC percentage matters. Whether we as an industry we've all came together and said it doesn't fucking matter,
Right.
but it matters to consumers, so it matters to buyers, therefore it matters to brands and cultivations. What are some of the strains that you absolutely love that you're unable to produce because of yield or THC percentage? Like it just doesn't make sense to the market, but you as a consumer, if you had your way, you'd be growing more of.
The pre-98 Bubba is a great example. And everybody in our inner circle knows and loves that strain, So it doesn't yield great. It's on the lower end of the yield. It's kind of acceptable. Like you could run it. It has a yield that you could survive, but THC is 18%, like 19%. It's not going to sell. Oh, sorry. Hey, so I'm at an interview right now.
You're Dave, right?
Yeah.
I'm Tony.
Oh, Tony, what's up, man? Sorry. So yeah, no, 18, 19%. So you can't get away with that, Like in today's market, you try to put it on the shelf, no one's gonna buy it.
Yeah. And that's something that I've found from every single grower that I've talked to is like they got one strain and like the THC percentage is like the market rejects it and they're like, yo, I just wish that it didn't matter, and that's what to your point. I look forward to that day where there is more more room for connoisseur products, whether it's a higher price point, understanding that the consumers can understand this doesn't yield very much, therefore the price is high because it's rare, right? We can't produce enough of this to make it financially viable, so it's got to be more. We see it in wine. I know some people like the comparisons, some people hate them, but you see it in wine. The limited special reserve batches of certain things command a crazy high price point. It's due to scarcity. I look forward to that type of stuff coming.
Yeah, and I think it will. It's just going to be a couple of years down the road,
Yeah, for now, we're ruled by THC and high THC, low price. It's a shame, but that's it is what it is, man. I mean, we're a part of that. What are some of the other things? I know, obviously, we're talking about a little bit beforehand. You got some operations in Nevada and are looking to expand. What's kind of the next couple steps for Clade9?
Yeah, I think the next steps are you survive in California, hopefully, because it's a crazy market. You just don't know how it's going to be. Expanding into New Jersey and maybe a couple other states. We do have like a footprint in Nevada through a partner named Virtue. But it's their brand. We just kind of support them on the genetic side and cultivation support. But yeah, no, I think in California, we want to stay focused really and just stick around. And I think look at markets that you have a better chance of making some money, like New Jersey potentially, or Illinois or Florida. They're more insulated, gives you a little bit more of a chance, as a business.
Absolutely. We're definitely seeing that trends across cannabis, where like you were saying earlier, California, due to how competitive it is and how it's difficult to operate in some of these other markets, and it's saturated, right? Like that's one of the biggest things that not a lot of people talk about. There's in some of these markets, it's either the taxes that are putting stuff out of the making the legal system have some, or contributing to the issues of the legal system, or it's simply the oversupply, right? Like at the end of the day, this is economics, it's supply and demand, and anywhere there's price compression, there's clearly there's too much supply. You know what I mean? And it's a sad reality. It's a hard conversation to have, but it's the only way we're going to see some of this profitability show up in kind of more businesses, is adjusting one of those taxes or scale.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
All right, man. Well, for people out there that want to find more information, clade9.com. That's the number Clade, the number 9.com. Anything else you want to plug before I get you up out of here, Dave?
I would say that if you're interested in our product here in California, the best way to find us is on Weed Maps. Just look for the brand Clade9, CLADE, the number 9, and you'll be able to find some of our flower. Thank you for the support ahead of time.
100, man. Well, yeah, you guys definitely check that out, man. They got the proprietary genetics, so check out the stuff that Dave's been over there breeding and nerding out on, man. They got some good weed straight out of LA. Man, I appreciate you hopping on here. Everyone tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, the subscribe button's a little bit below Dave. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, make sure to hit follow, like, leave a comment. Even if you got hate, man, send those shots this way. We'll welcome them with open arms. Appreciate for everyone